5 days before the funeral, he was still breathing. 5 days before the funeral, she was his wife. 1 day after the funeral, she became nobody. They took her room. They took her chair. They removed photographs from the walls and placed them behind the refrigerator. His son said into the phone that in a year she would not exist. And they laughed at her. But she remained silent. Because beneath the floorboards of the laundry room, where they placed her on a folding cot, lay a folder. And in that folder was everything. All the evidence that without her, none of them would have existed. Not the company, not the money, not the future. And a week later, when they gathered for the will reading, she understood. It was time to speak. Chapter 1. The Inheritance of Indifference. My daughter whispered it first, though not to me. Do not bank on anything from father. 78 million. I heard it while descending the mahogany staircase, still wrapped in mourning attire, the scent of funeral lilies clinging to my clothes like an accusation. At the reading of the will, he blanched the moment my name was mentioned. Impossible. She is breathing? I assumed we deburied her weeks ago. Should we verify her vitals before we proceed? These words greeted me as I entered the foyer, the very room where I once arranged flowers for dinner parties, where my husband's photographs lined the walls in expensive frames, where the echo of my own laughter had long since faded into the wallpaper. The ground had barely settled over his grave when they returned, not to remember, not to grieve, but to claim. Within hours the estate transformed into a marketplace of avarice. Voices multiplied through hallways designed for symphonies, footsteps pounded across floors I had polished, and the sanctuary I had built became a stage for their performance of hunger. I remained at the staircase's base, my hand resting on the wooden rail my husband had once sanded smooth during an autumn when we still believed in forever, and watched as they catalogued my existence like inventory at an auction house. This belongs to me now. My grandson applied a fluorescent blue adhesive label to the antique secretary, then to the velvet sofa, then to the glass cabinet containing our wedding crystal. He moved with the efficiency of someone claiming carnival prizes, unburdened by the weight of what he touched. His wife held up her mobile device, some architectural application displaying measurements and spatial diagrams. We'll transform this into a wellness retreat once she vacates, she announced to no particular person. Perhaps a meditation garden. Definitely enhanced illumination. I remained motionless. No one offered me a seat. No one interrupted their planning. The daughter-in-law circulated among them carrying a tray of sparkling wine. We re-honoring father's achievements, she declared with forced brightness. He constructed something magnificent, and we will preserve his vision. And eliminate the ghosts, someone muttered. Laughter filled the room like poison gas. My chair from the dinner table had disappeared, replaced with a folding seat retrieved from the garage, one leg unstable, the fabric worn. They redirected me toward the utility room. You'll find it quieter there, away from the commotion. I complied without resistance, settling into an uncomfortable silence, facing a mop bucket and a deteriorating broom, holding a paper plate containing stringy chicken and potatoes that had been boiled into submission. Invisible. Always invisible. From the adjacent chamber I could hear them clearly. This mansion reeks of neglect and mortality, one voice declared. We'll demolish the original wallpaper, reconstruct the kitchen entirely. My grandson peeled away a bright tangerine sticker and affixed it to the wooden buffet beside where I sat. This one belongs to me, he announced with satisfaction. His sister entered, phone already open with some property analysis software. We'll reimagine this space once she is no longer here, she said, rotating slowly to survey the perimeter. Perhaps a wine cellar. Or a meditation room. They did not bother whispering. They did not even acknowledge my presence. My cup rattled against the saucer. Father mentioned she'd expire before him, someone offered. That was apparently his only miscalculation. She constructed sustenance. He constructed wealth, another added, and the laughter crescendoed. Let her decompose with the furniture, one cousin sneered. She see not even identify the current calendar year. Would the pension remain ours if we modified her mailing address temporarily? My granddaughter suggested playfully. God, she is practically already deceased, her brother contributed. Why do not we assign her the storage shed and call it resolved? I consumed the cold poultry. It tasted like chalk dust mixed with bitterness. I swallowed regardless. Chapter 2. The Vault of Secrets. I remained silent throughout their declarations. I did not protest. I did not demand acknowledgement. But I reached into the interior pocket of my cardigan and felt the texture of documents I had guarded meticulously for years. A notarized letter from the financial institution, dated precisely 14 years prior. It designated me as joint partner and foundational stakeholder in the family enterprise. My designation was recorded in permanent ink, not in fading graphite, the distinction that carries legal significance. They remained unaware. They never questioned. During those years when the corporation hemorrhaged capital and insolvency loomed like a specter, it was not consultants or professionals who reversed the trajectory. It was me. I liquidated every piece of jewelry inherited from previous generations, my mother's emerald collection, my ceremonial bangles, the brooch pinned to my wedding dress. Every piece represented memory and weight, and I converted them all into currency without informing anyone, without seeking permission. I transferred the funds to the company's account and offered my husband a single instruction: utilize this. Ensure they never recognize its origin. He complied without inquiry. He preferred ignorance. That was his methodology. Composed externally, compartmentalized internally. I retreated behind the scenes. 2 days later, the arrangement concluded successfully. The partners committed. The corporation persisted. They celebrated him as visionary. They proclaimed him a self-produced phenomenon. Nobody acknowledged me. But the genuine injury occurred later. A month afterward, I observed the updated marketing materials. His portrait dominated the cover, accompanied by copy declaring legacy constructed in isolation. I maintained composure when I read it. I controlled my expression. I remained mute, but I retained everything in memory. I remember composing the capital expansion proposal during night hours. He was preparing for an investor presentation and possessed no strategy. Market conditions were shifting. Industry dynamics were transforming, yet his pitch recycled obsolete frameworks. So I positioned myself at the kitchen table after household members slept, brewing chamomile tea, and commenced writing. I formulated a comprehensive multi-stage growth plan based on contemporary market movements, calculated projected investor returns, and developed a scalable framework contingent upon supply route restructuring. I had executed comparable work in an earlier existence. Prior to matrimony, prior to offspring, prior to the business card reading simply homemaker. That evening I authorized the manuscript with a pseudonym nobody would recognize. Innocuous. Unremarkable. The following morning I secured it in an envelope, applied postage, and directed it to our office with no return address, just his name and the business. It arrived 2 days later. At dinner that evening he referenced an unexpected communication. Someone submitted anonymously. "It's extraordinary," he observed, laughing. "The handwriting even resembles yours." I offered no response and continued stirring the soup. That proposal became the foundation for their public offering launch 6 months subsequently. It generated more than $50 million in capital injection. They commissioned a plaque for the building entrance, acknowledging innovative strategy. His innovative strategy. I accepted this during that period. I convinced myself that the family structure required a singular hero, and it was preferable for him to occupy that position. Is not it peculiar how women absorb the lesson of dissolving smoothly, of deriving satisfaction from providing structure while someone else receives recognition? We internalize instruction that restraint constitutes nobility, that renunciation equals potency, yet prolonged silence transforms into erasure. Chapter 3. The Awakening. And presently they navigate through my constructed home, positioning their labels across furnishings, describing inheritance as if I never participated in its formation. Presently they ridicule my recollection, question my comprehension, dismiss my relevance. They remain unaware of what I contributed, what I engineered, what I concealed. In the bedroom closet, beneath linens that nobody disturbs, rests a portfolio with aged leather binding. The interior contains the authentic manuscript of that proposal. The ink has slightly deteriorated from a night of anxious fingers. My designation appears in the corner, followed by documentation from the patent authority. That identical pseudonym appears on every file. The authorization specifies me as exclusive intellectual proprietor. The designation is recorded not under the business entity, but underneath my identification. I disregarded the compensation disbursements. They arrived consistently on a quarterly cycle throughout the years. I maintained no requirement for the money. I required something else entirely. I required recognition. I required the consciousness of my own agency, even in solitude, even in obscurity. But presently they have positioned themselves on opposing ends. They supplied me humiliation. They extracted my acknowledgement. They announced my demise while my respiratory capacity persisted. So I have unsealed the portfolio once more. I have scheduled an appointment with the attorney. I have contracted a specialist in handwriting forensics. I have arranged everything methodically, not in pursuit of retaliation, not in pursuit of corrective judgment, but in pursuit of authenticity. Because when they assemble in that chamber and the testament is recounted, and they comprehend my identification fastened not merely to financial holdings, but to the inheritance they presumed was exclusively theirs, there will materialize silence. For the first time I will project volume, and none of them will possess capability to disregard me again. They neglected to establish ocular engagement when they implemented it. It transpired on Wednesday, merely 4 days following the burial. The residence maintained a faint fragrance of lilies and evergreen from the burial arrangement. Someone abandoned the condolence correspondence on the piano, unopened, as though sorrow itself had become an inconvenience too significant to process. However, the atmosphere had transformed. The preliminary phase had concluded. Currently commenced the categorization, the appropriation, the displacement. And the displacement commenced with me. We've settled on what's preferable, Margot announced, forgoing any volume reduction. She relocates downstairs to the smaller area. I blinked. The utility room. Technically a service space, she clarified with a constrained expression. Yet adequate room exists for a sleeping cot. My sleeping quarters, our sleeping quarters, had already vanished. I could perceive the disruption overhead. Doors to storage spaces opening. Luggage being transported through corridors. My fragrance containers. My fabric collection. My accumulated literature. All being deposited into cardboard receptacles. Not with delicacy. Not with affection. Simply extracted. I ambulated gradually toward the stairwell, only to observe tags affixed to containers. Donation 1 read. Another designated outdated. Yet another labeled elderly belongings. They demonstrated insufficient courtesy to conceal their evaluations. Margot Espouse, my eldest espouse, clutched a document organizer, gesturing toward furnishings like an individual supervising a relocation operation. That accent table functions effectively for the countryside residents, he communicated to his spouse. Apply a marker. A neon crimson sticker manifested like a contusion on the wooden surface. This one belongs to me. I observed as my recollections were appropriated incrementally. The ceremonial tableware. The rocking mechanism where I nurtured my offspring through midnight fevers. Even the mechanical turntable, the one we activated during power interruptions, now displayed the identical cheerful designation. Margot confronted me with that penetrating, cultivated expression she maintained like protective covering. She requires no sleeping space, she communicated to the assembled group. Merely a sleeping platform until her expiration. Awkward articulations of recognition followed. Nobody contributed substantially. One of the more junior male family members, Marcus or perhaps Matthew, I no longer monitor carefully, muttered something while traversing the kitchen aperture. Perhaps we could maintain her contact information. We could continue receiving her pension deposits. They reacted with entertainment to that contribution. I did not. I merely proceeded deliberately, articulation restricted, toward the previous utility maintenance chamber. It smelled of disinfectant and deterioration. A solitary illumination fixture flickered intermittently overhead. A synthetic receptacle occupied one corner. A corroded sink occupied another. A rest platform had been positioned against the wall. No bedding accompanied it. merely an antiquated transport blanket. This represented my accommodation. My baggage had been positioned alongside it. A deteriorated thermal container. A photographic frame with damaged corners positioned on top. I lifted it. Our 35th commemorative photograph. We positioned ourselves before the climbing roses, his appendage surrounding me, my hand upon his torso. Behind us, the residence ascended, dignified and impressive. During that moment, it had embodied our collective possession. Presently, that identical photograph had been removed from the corridor wall and concealed behind the appliance. I recovered it while obtaining hydration, positioned downward, compressed between a bristle apparatus and a container of expired grain products. They possessed insufficient dignity to preserve its visibility. Did they imagine I would not perceive this, or did they imagine I'd forgotten? They consistently disregard that I retain everything. I recollect the evening he engraved our initials into the exterior banister. I recollect the fragrance of cinnamon and botanical extracts on winter celebration mornings. I recollect supporting my offspring during his tears over university rejection, murmuring, "Your essence remains adequate." I recollect formulating pastries from fundamental components, transporting him to performance preparations at midnight, threading drapery manually to establish this residence as habitation. Yet presently I constitute merely temporary occupation, logistical complication, something to navigate around during the inheritance progression. Margot manifested at my sleeping platform that evening transporting a folded cloth rectangle and a polymer container of odorless cleanser. "These are designated for your possession," she articulated, positioning them with the intonation of humanitarian contribution. "We'll consume at 7 o'clock. You'll sustenance yourself afterward." I acknowledged. That comprised all my capability. Chapter 4. The Fortress of Truth. That evening, whilst they enjoyed beef and vintage grape cultivation in the dining chamber, I positioned myself on the sleeping platform, extracting a tin of soup I'd kept concealed throughout the house. I required the terminal portion of a metal key to penetrate it. Nobody had positioned a metal opening apparatus within my proximity. They verbalized that I produced soup. That's the commentary I overheard when they imagined I remained inattentive. Father constructed wealth, one articulated. She constructed sustenance. As if nutrition did not constitute groundwork. As if affection and attentiveness and self-abnegation carried no significance because they did not materialize in financial statements. I generated soup indeed, yet I additionally generated them. And presently they re-dismantling me with giggling and adhesive and diminutive neon stickers. The cruelty never projects volume. It's discreet, exact, refined, yet it penetrates nonetheless. Subsequently, after the residence quieted, I returned to the appliance and carefully recovered the commemorative photograph. I eliminated the accumulation from the transparent surface. I positioned it against my torso. This location once constituted my habitation. I once embodied its consciousness. They might imagine they've obliterated me, yet they've merely reinvigorated what I once transmitted and what I remain capable of reacquiring. Tomorrow the legal representative will contact me, and I'll acknowledge with the articulation they overlooked I maintained. It commenced with a portfolio, aged, deteriorated, with covering material protecting its contents. I maintained it beneath the separated planks in the utility chamber, presently my habitation, positioned behind a receptacle of floor treatment implements nobody ever disturbs. The interior contained matters they never contemplated questioning because they never contemplated questioning me. The morning following their assessment of my area for conversion into a restoration chamber, I secured the portfolio and traversed 2 city blocks in frigid conditions to the communications booth positioned exterior to the pharmaceutical establishment. They terminated my telephone connection by accident, yet I had not disregarded the telephone number. When Mr. Solomon acknowledged, I merely articulated, "The moment has materialized." He did not request clarification. He merely responded, "Present yourself tomorrow." Mr. Solomon had functioned as my spouse's legal representative for generations. Yet what they remained unaware constitutes that he additionally functioned as my representative years preceding the matrimony transformed into performance, years preceding I transformed into architectural element and nutritional preparation. The subsequent day in his administrative chamber, I revealed the documentation sequentially. Initially, the Consolidated Financial Holding Certificate. My identification manifested precisely alongside my spouse's, not as spectator, not as dependent, as co-creator, co-administrator. Subsequently, the capital contribution contract from the regional financial organization dated 14 years prior. It demonstrated precisely the deposit, my dowry, my maternal ancestral jewelry collection, and the precious metal ornaments from my marriage chest. I de-liquidated all of them discreetly when my spouse's corporation faced disintegration. The capital purchased him the acquisition that preserved his enterprise. I never sought acknowledgement. I merely wished for his continuation. Finally, I transmitted a collection of handwritten pages, discolored with age, perimeter edges rolled. Every one manifested my distinctive cursive. It constitutes the authentic manuscript, I articulated gently. The framework for the public offering. Mr. Solomon S. Optical apertures restricted. You composed this? I shook my head. I transmitted it. I transmitted it employing a pseudonym. He distributed it employing his identification. I retained that evening with precision. My spouse had been moving back and forth through the private study, a drinking glass of fermented grain spirits disregarded on the furniture. His corporation's governing council had disapproved every iteration he demonstrated. I ascended from bed following his sleep, retrieved writing materials, and continued until illumination emerged. When morning materialized, my digits were discolored with pigmentation. I never revealed its composition to him. I transmitted it to our postal container with obscured origin location. He distributed it at the subsequent governing council gathering employing his identification. They endorsed it unanimously. It generated him $36 million in capital, and I never articulated anything. Mr. Solomon adjusted nearer. Might I? He extracted a file containing from his storage and recovered a modest envelope. The interior contained communication, mechanically produced yet marked with L. Montgomery, that identical pseudonym I employed on the composed iteration. I observed as he assessed the signature. Do you continue to compose with this methodology? He questioned. I acknowledged. He contacted a specialist that afternoon itself, an authority in signature assessment located at a prestigious university. They invested numerous hours analyzing curves and angles, compression intensity and gaps. Subsequently that period the authority transmitted their evaluation. The documents constituted a correspondence, 100% matching, and the authentic composition included intellectual rights conditions. Proprietorship and recognition belonged to me. In accordance with governmental patent regulations, the framework, the design for the public offering, constituted intellectual creation. Considering it had never been formally conveyed, and I possessed capability to demonstrate authorship, the compensation entitlements reverted to me, millions, perhaps significantly greater, contingent upon profit duration. All mine. Mr. Solomon regarded me across his polished desktop and articulated, You comprehend the implications? I acknowledged. I do not require all of it, I articulated. Not everything. What do you desire? I repositioned the communication into the portfolio and positioned myself upright. I require my articulation restored. And the first occasion in months I permitted myself an expression of recognition. Diminutive, comprehending, originating from my interior and traveling across my physiognomy. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. They depositioned me in burial while my consciousness remained active. They presumed muteness signified ineffectiveness, that attachment signified dissolution, that maternity signified capitulation. They imagined I transformed like deteriorating wall treatment, yet I merely observed and retained. I forgotten neither my identity nor my capability. I constituted the individual who absorbed contractual language by candlelight while my spouse slumbered. The individual who educated herself regarding investment legislation, utilizing a provisional library authorization. The individual who generated soup indeed, yet additionally formulations. Intelligent formulations. Presently, as they fumbled through the residence attempting to deconstruct my assistance, they remained unaware that my designation graced the ground beneath their contact points. and the documentary confirmation had already transferred to the legal authority. By the moment they positioned themselves within that chamber for the documentation assessment, all preparations would be finalized. Yet initially, ID authorized their celebration, their competitions, their amusement, authorized them to move through residual matter, imagining ID already disappeared with atmospheric circulation, because they overlooked me, and that constituted their concluding miscalculation. They positioned me at the platform's extremity, a folding mechanism obviously, because permitting me to inhabit furniture would devastate their visual harmony with their tailored garments and designer accessories, and their outdated existence. The legal establishment transmitted contemporary vibrations, containing glass partitions and leather furnishings, frigid throughout. Exterior, precipitation descended. Interior, it could have been snow. My offspring Marcus positioned himself proximally to the entrance. Appendages intersected confidently, matrimonial jewelry gleaming. His spouse whispered something into his auditory opening. He chuckled, barely restrained for the chamber's occupants. She'll expire by subsequent winter season, he articulated, sampling from a complaint beverage receptacle. Do not anticipate financial compensation for her. My granddaughter transmitted electronic communications beneath the platform surface. My grandson practiced his identification on documentation. Neither acknowledged me. Mr. Solomon penetrated, briefcase equipped, and all individuals elevated. He maintained the persona of finality continuously, a representation whose expression typically signified conclusion. I appreciate your attendance, he commenced. Currently we reenacting the conclusive intentions of Mr. Robert Montgomery as established in his officially recorded modified testament. Nobody registered the refined emphasis on the term modified. Multiple containers distributed, sheets rotated, and subsequently Mr. Solomon penetrated his receptacle and extracted a compact metallic audio apparatus. He initiated it. My spouse's voice pervaded the chamber, slower than I recalled, more exhausted, yet articulate, serene, unambiguous. If my offspring communicates negatively regarding his maternal guardian, he articulated, deduct 1 million per communication unit. Vacuum. The environment's oxygen evaporated instantaneously. The voice proceeded, calculate the quantity he owes. Immediate, complete absence of motion, followed by metallic implement colliding with the polished work surface. What constitutes this? Marcus questioned, positioning himself forward. That remains inaccurate. That remains excluded from the Mr. Solomon positioned one appendage upward and transmitted a published assessment. The header read, supplementary material, confirmed technological documentation, domestic recording apparatus, kitchen chamber 3 revolutions following funeral. He activated the next subdivision. 1. She continues to inhale. 2. I calculated she already departed. 3. Validate her cardiovascular function at the documentation assessment. 4. She generated soup. He generated wealth. He persisted. 463 communicated communications assessed as negative commentary regarding his maternal guardian. 92 Mr. Solomon established that totals 92 million in reductions. However, several manifested particularly imaginative. The remaining 2,875,000 were subtracted as discretionary penalty in accordance with addendum section number 19 in Mr. Montgomery's revision. He activated the concluding subdivision. Outstanding wealth designated to Mr. Marcus Montgomery, $4,500. Marcus expelled himself from his position. This constitutes absurdity. You possess no authority to accomplish this. That female, she's constituted burden throughout existence. Father would never. He would, I articulated tranquilly. It constituted my premier articulation during the morning. Every individual redirected their attention. My articulation did not project magnitude, yet it did not require it. Mr. Solomon proceeded with composure. Currently, concerning the principal recipient of the consolidated holdings, the intellectual property legal entitlements fastened to the public offering framework, and residual financial holdings, Robert Montgomery has designated them to his spouse, Eleanor Montgomery. He transmitted me the portfolio. It possessed more mass than anticipated. The interior encompassed the property documentation, the portfolio modifications, the certification to the intellectual work production fastened to the public offering framework. A secondary portfolio, proportionally diminutive, encompassed property documentation to a residence in southern Italian countryside, and a communication composed manually. My spouse's handwriting. Forgive me for the chronological periods I permitted your illumination to remain concealed. I never disregarded. I merely desired that eventually they recognize your contribution. If they could not, permit this to communicate with greater intensity than I ever managed. You constructed this alongside me. Permit currently the globe comprehends your nomenclature. Marcus remained static, physiognomy pallid. His spouse commenced manipulating her communication apparatus, presumably contacting a legal representative, a psychotherapist, ecclesiastical authority. I examined the chamber's occupants, individuals who rehearsed their accomplishment declarations during their transportation vehicle journey, and I articulated nothing because corrective judgment requires no projection. It merely necessitates authenticity. Chapter 6. The departure. I retrieved my covering. That identical aged beige one they designated depressing the preceding winter celebration. I moved deliberately previous to Marcus, whose appendage remained tensioned into a fist against the polished platform. Approaching the garment receptacle, I redirected toward Mr. Solomon. Does that finalize matters? He acknowledged. Appreciate the Italian countryside. And I did, yet previously redirecting toward the family I nurtured, clothed, defended, and ultimately outlasted. You positioned me in burial while my consciousness remained active. I articulated, composed. Regrettably, I possess one additional concept remaining. The environment as quiet subsequent to the documentation assessment was not merely uncomfortable, it contained profundity. Yet my responsibility remained incomplete. Mr. Solomon comprehended this. He motioned toward the tertiary envelope. This, he articulated, maneuvering the packet with protected care, concerns intellectual proprietorship circumstances not formerly revealed to the family assembly. He positioned a collection of forms before the chamber. 14 years preceding, shortly before Montgomery Corporation prevented insolvency via a revolutionary public offering framework, an unidentified communication transmitted through correspondence arrived. The framework offered in that communication transformed into the establishment for the corporate equity issuance. He activated the subsequent subdivision. This authorization was formally registered employing a pseudonym E.M. Crawford, previously supposed to represent a specialist or undisclosed tactician. Marcus elevated his optical apertures. What comprises the relevance? It constituted Father S. Corporation, his approach. Mr. Solomon tranquilly activated the subsequent subdivision. Carries everything, Mr. Marcus Montgomery, as we lately finalized forensic assessment on the authentic iterations of that communication, encompassing pigmentation assessment, signature examination, and mail submission sequencing. He transmitted a certification traversing the platform. The pseudonym belonged to her. He articulated, designating toward me. Your maternal guardian, Eleanor Montgomery. Gasps from various occupants in the chamber. Even the atmosphere seemed to hesitate. This, he persisted, maintaining elevated amounted certification, constitutes the official documentation of Eleanor Montgomery as singular intellectual provider to patent documentation classification number, additionally recognized as the Montgomery Stabilization Framework. The certification currently generates compensation via numerous permission channels, aggregating to $9,400,000 yearly. Marcus's spouse compressed her decorative garment. Catherine, my granddaughter, released her communication apparatus, yet Marcus stammered. She generated soup. She repaired garments. And Mr. Solomon permitted himself the most minimal of expressions. Indeed. And she salvaged your paternal authority's company architecture. He extracted a refolded communication from an isolated envelope, barely aged, yet preserved as new. Preceding his departure, Mr. Montgomery transmitted this documentation, sealed and officially verified. He refined his throat and transmitted audibly. She recognized the necessity prior to the globe comprehended it remained broken. She continued restrained because she cared for me. I requested her to authorize me to obtain recognition because the governing council would not accompany a feminine-presenting individual. Yet I comprehended. I consistently comprehended. This corporation constitutes her consciousness transformed into documentation. A penetrating inhalation originated from the chamber's posterior area, the category that materializes when an individual acknowledges all their presumptions fractured like antique crystal composition. Marcus articulated something beneath his respirations. Precisely what? I questioned, establishing ocular contact. He elevated his attention, ultimately regarding me. I remained unaware. He articulated, articulation quieter. I remained unaware it constituted you. I neglected to generate articulation because ID expended years obliterating my designation so his paternal authority could materialize as integrated. ID maintained my designation from the plaque. ID combusted the iterations. ID even transmitted the ultimate framework from another geographic coordinate. Yet I had not disregarded. Mr. Solomon transmitted the chamber a solitary final subdivision. A chronological accounting of all compensation distributions from the authorization's initiation. All registered to a conservatory mechanism disregarded waiting presently, he articulated, transmitting me a portfolio with metallic border. It belongs to you currently. Catherine articulated, her articulation peculiarly diminished. We de-existed off her consciousness continuously, were not we? Nobody offered response. They remained excessively preoccupied monitoring their representations in the glass partitions, questioning how they overlooked the most significant consciousness in the residence because it had been protected in protective coverings. I positioned myself upright. They did not terminate me. Not previously. I composed the cognitive representation. I articulated tranquilly, fastening my covering. And you all imagined it manifested randomly. Nobody transferred as I exited. Identical previous, the feminine who deconstituted previously dismissed as architectural component, as deteriorating environmental treatment, had merely reinforced them that enterprises ascend using the constructions of females excessively intelligent to warrant observation and excessively resilient to undergo obliteration. Chapter 7. The Exodus and Transformation. They acquired 48 chronological durations. That's what the communication articulated, authorized by the administrator, sealed through the legitimate authority. A legitimate restriction for the unappreciative to disappear from the residence they previously disregarded. By morning the displacement commenced. Containers collided through corridors. Articulation that previously possessed prevalence had vanished. Catherine maintained composure. Her optical apertures contained moisture, yet her appendages moved with acceleration, collecting decorative items into velvet containers that did not presently belong to her. Marcus attempted. Maternal guardian, forgive me. That comprised his complete capacity prior to his articulation fractured. I examined him. This masculine who previously positioned himself on my lower extremities to examine container characters, who previously secured my appendage in tempestuous atmospheric conditions, presently diminished into quivering silhouette, requesting additional opportunity. I did not generate liquid secretion. I executed adequate of that. I articulated merely. You articulated initially. The testamentless ingest. He transferred backward as if authenticity had struck him with greater intensity than any corporeal strike. Beyond the kitchen aperture, I detected his spouse projecting volume. Yuri ruthless. She demonstrates ruthlessness. I progressed into the aperture. Incorrect. I articulated. I transmitted you accommodations. You transmitted me anguish. She initiated additional articulation, yet I concluded distributing my auditory organs to her requirements. I traversed through the residences deliberately, delicately, as though reintroducing myself to something consecrated. The corridor still carried the delicate fragrance of heritage botanical compounds and luminosity, yet no extended cluttered with conceit. I traversed the guest chamber, presently depleted of its restoration chamber delusions and online design concepts. The diminutive sticker positioned on the looking glass arrested my regard. This one belongs to me. I extricated it, refolded it previously, and deposited it into the refuse. Chamber through chamber I assembled them all. The azure one positioned on the decorative furniture, the golden one positioned on the upholstered furniture featuring my spouse's designation. Even the emerald one positioned on the metallic frame containing our matrimonial photograph. This one belongs to me, they decommunicated. Never additional. Not genuinely. They presumed kindness constituted authorization. In the dining chamber where entertainment formerly existed, I hesitated proximal to the keyboard apparatus. Something had positioned a sticker there additionally. I positioned the cover gently. That one consistently belonged to him, I whispered, and he did not distribute it to nobody. The residents experienced quiet, not absence, merely cleanliness, as if it maintained respiratory suspension with excessive duration, and currently could eventually experience exhalation. Beyond, I advanced onto the rear porch. The botanical specimens had disappeared, eradicated the preceding summer for carbonated beverage evaluation regions. Yet the pomegranate shrub maintained its crooked posture adjacent to the aperture, its rooting structure persistent, its exterior damaged from countless summers, and positioned proximal to the foundation, the diminutive botanical specimen I decultivated when Marcus experienced his 5th rotation. One fragile extension remained, defensive protrusions unclothed, foliage recoiled, disregarded. I positioned myself into a bending posture, articulations against the refreshing ceramic. The ground transmitted void, entirely void. I retrieved the moisture distribution mechanism from the rear exterior structure, partially compromised yet operational. I transmitted gradually, perceiving the ground consume. As the moisture permeated, I articulated, we generate development. Because we will, not because they demonstrated conviction, yet because I never discontinued nourishing the foundations. The atmospheric circulation strengthened subsequently, transmitting across the exterior wooden platform, transporting with itself an uncommon quiet, the category materializing following a residence achieves reclamation. This structure was not inhabited by phantom manifestations currently. It belonged to me. I liquidated the residence the succeeding spring. Not originating from destructive intention, not regarding financial compensation, basically because it no extended constituted mine. Certain positions accumulate excessive noise and no dimension of cleansing quiets what's been articulated between the barriers. With the transaction finalized, I established habitation within a modest architectural residence positioning toward the marine current in southern Italian countryside. The category of accommodation featuring comprehensive apertures, off-white fabric coverings, and the murmur of maritime surges consistently approximating non-existent moving stairways, non-existent whispered communications beyond barriers, non-existent stickers claiming what never constituted theirs. Merely tranquility and capacity for me to contemplate vocally presently. Chapter 8. The Legacy Reclaimed. The compensation from the authorization proceeded to manifest, composed and subdued. Yet I did not necessitate it. Not everything. So I initiated something contemporary. A charitable entity. A diminutive establishment with an extensive nomenclature. Feminine individuals who experienced obliteration. It maintained no glamorous character. It did not accommodate ceremonial occasions or colored ribbon inauguration proceedings. Merely a financial mechanism, a function inadequate to distribute learning awards, monetary assistance, and primarily, recognition to feminine individuals who deconstructed inaudibly and been disregarded audibly. I comprehended that sensation. I comprehended the magnitude of articulating brilliance into another's prominence. And I comprehended the improvement of retrieving that prominence for myself. Beyond my entrance aperture, I positioned a manually constructed designation. It originated from the aged oak plant my spouse and I decultivated initially. I maintained a fragment when the atmospheric violence separated it years prior. The designation articulated, this establishment was supported by someone considered liability. Appreciate the quiet. It produced the delivery individual's amusement every single instance. Interior, I maintained minimal fundamentals and scattered recollections. Among them, a discolored sketch positioned to the refrigeration mechanism, pigment composition on foundation composition material, produced by my most diminutive grandchild years preceding they comprehended the importance to disengage from me with disapproval. A representation figure with magnified circular apertures positioned subsequent to substantial illumination mechanism. In brilliant purple pigmentation, it articulated directed to maternal grandmother. You contemplate more effectively than technological search systems. ID nearly deposited it toward obliteration previously when they articulated ID experience cognitive dissolution, that my remembrance had deteriorated, that I should merely position myself, maintain pleasant expression and continue muted. Yet I had not disregarded that illustration, and I never discontinued comprehending how to contemplate. They deposition me in burial utilizing presumptions, aged, depleted, disappearing, irrelevant. Yet I was not any of those classifications. I constituted individual, observant, recalling what they wished eliminated. And significantly, I continued contemplating because I never discontinued. They imagined I was disappearing, yet I was merely anticipating the appropriate period to contemplate vocally. Epilogue. Voices that refuse to fade. If you've ever experienced sensation of being undervalued, misjudged or displaced, merely acknowledge, your historical account has not terminated till you authenticate it does. She represented additional compared to maternal guardian, additional compared to marital companion, additional compared to feminine individual positioned in background. She constituted the consciousness that composed the navigational diagram, and when they obliterated her, she wrote a contemporary conclusion. If this communication affected you, conceptualize the magnitude of others still anticipating acknowledgement.